For our presentation, we've decided to look at Calle Florida by Horacio Coppola, as we really feel that it represents some key themes of Buenos Aires at the time. We also use many different photographs, these being some examples, to aid our research and gain a clear understanding of Horacio's work. Our research question for today is how significantly did Western countries influence the modernization of Buenos Aires and Argentina as a whole?
The photos of Calle Florida and Corrientes are very similar and highlight the city as a model place to live, which is no different from the city of Paris and New York. In both photographs, we can observe the same contrast of lights and shadows, the modern streets of Buenos Aires and the nightlife. In Calle Florida and Corrientes, the angle of the camera and the way that the photos are taken is similar. It makes the viewer feel like they're in the photograph. However, the angle of the daytime photo is different. The photograph is taken from above, which makes it easier to gain an understanding of the dynamics of the city. The photograph is a bit more different as it shows the life of the people in Buenos Aires during the day. The photograph portrays the life of Argentinian people and show how much the influence that the Western countries have had on Argentina at that time. First of all, the way people are dressed is similar to the people in France, for example, at that time, which shows the loss of their own identity as a cause of modernization, but it also shows the development of the middle class. In addition, the changes in the city can be seen in both photos, as in Calle Florida. In all of them, we can see the development of the businesses, such as shops and restaurants, changes in the architecture, such as roads, and the layout of the city.
Rose Aboy speaks of the architectural transformation that took place in Buenos Aires throughout the 1930s. She more specifically focuses on domestic transformation, for example, the construction of high rise buildings, which she said was a consequence of the economic crisis of 1929. She moves on to explain that first generation high rise apartments were inspired by European bourgeois houses to modern apartments. This very clearly shows the influence that Western European countries, for example, France, had on Latin American countries like Argentina. What made all of this construction possible in the modernizing period was due to the fact that many construction firms, German construction firms, had already established themselves in Buenos Aires. Here she is again supporting the argument about the influence that Western countries, who were more developed than Latin American countries, had in the 1930s. Similarly, Adam David uses the same argument surrounding modernization of architecture in Buenos Aires, but explains how it changed over the decades, which can be specifically seen in the picture we have chosen. He explains that from Cubanism of Picasso and Black Art Deco, adopted a greater reliance on geometric forms and incorporated the idea of using fragmented shapes to present multiple perspectives simultaneously. However, he demonstrates that after the Great Depression, Art Deco buildings in Argentina changed. For example, in the 1930s, he explains that Art Deco retained many of its defining characteristics, but structures became less ostentatious, while new materials such as chrome plating, stainless steel, plastics, and neon lighting were applied. This is more specifically referred to as streamline moderne. This new type of Art Deco can be explicitly seen in the picture. The curved buildings and the use of neon lighting suggest that this type of design reached Buenos Aires very quickly. This could also have a great deal to do with the fact that Argentina had such close relations with North America and was directly affected by the Great Depression that happened there. Not only did modernization have effects on the physical structure of Argentina and Buenos Aires, it also had major effects on the development of women's rights and their place in society. Amalia Quiriello states that the capitalist modernization in Argentina, mainly in the city of Buenos Aires, originated the participation of women in a wide range of salaried activities. She explains that in this way, workers and employees, along with teachers and nurses, became urban characters that powerfully attracted the attention of intellectuals, politicians, and feminists. Not only did this develop the way that women were perceived in Buenos Aires, it also helped to change this cultural makeup of society as they had known it. The change in social culture and modernization of Buenos Aires brought about an emergence of the market for cultural goods. Specifically, in the last quarter of the 19th century, according to Vincent Maria, the increase in popular culture offered female writers a place to collaborate and assume an authorial voice through their writings. As the picture shows a sign, Para la mujer moderna, we can't help but realize that places for the modern woman, inspired by her, were popping up all over Buenos Aires. That represented a modernization movement and a change in attitude that hadn't been seen before. Coppola is able to capture this moment of change, which can be said to be potentially inspired by suffrage movements, for example, in America, with the continuation of the flapper movement, which promoted a free and independent woman defying gender norms, and even in Great Britain with the calls for the votes for all women.
In 1926, the Congress granted full legal status to women, but they didn't get to vote until 1950 because restricting voting rights was a good way to have more political control. Women started to get an increasingly influential role in society. As a result, some major improvements can be noticed. For example, it became acceptable for women to wear skirts to the knee and to smoke. People started realizing that there is a new market segment to target. This led to the growth of advertising targeting women for certain products and services. Coppola highlights the improvement of women's role in society in his photograph. The main focus is on the sign saying Para la mujer moderna, which clearly targets women and is a clear evidence of modernization.
There is an idea that modernization was also brought to Buenos Aires through the photographs of Coppola. However, scholars disagree on which of his influences truly prompted his movement towards the avant-garde style that he adopted in his 1936 series of photographs. Coppola suggests that the most probable indicator of Coppola's development as a photographer was his time spent at Bauhaus in Berlin, under and alongside the work of Alfred Stieglitz. The New Vision and New Objectivity movements were hugely influenced by the dynamic and modern angles from the work of Paul Strand, which we can see in Coppola's work. An important distinction between Coppola's work from 1931 to 1936 is that he was much less experimental in the latter body of work, perhaps suggesting that he had settled into these new styles that he had adopted from his time in Germany, which strongly suggests the level of influence of the European trends towards Coppola and thus Buenos Aires, due to the level from which these images were commissioned. Coppola's perception of modernity may have been that which mirrored the trends of Europe, and when this idea is translated into a set of images that celebrated the 400-year anniversary of the city, it becomes apparent how European trends influenced the perceived modernization of Buenos Aires. Tell suggests that the way the city of Buenos Aires is still viewed is partly thanks to Coppola's photography and the way it provided an image of the city in a way that had never been before. She also gives weight to the way that Coppola views different cities, especially in his film work. This highlights his focus not on the architecture or typical aspect of urban life in the cities such as Berlin and London, but on the public spaces and what instead inhabits those. This shows a progression of Coppola's work and further shows how, despite the appearance of architecture-centered photography, images such as Florida Street are commenting on the people within the urban setting. This helps us to analyze Coppola's work better, as it gives us an understanding of his interest in sociological aspects of the urban cityscape.
Horacio Coppola's work might also be looked at as a means of dealing with the modernization that was taking place. In terms of the views of Octavio Paz, a Mexican-American speaking for the whole of Spanish America, he sees the anti-modernist art of Spanish Americans as mimicking that of the European artists when, in comparison to Europe and places like Paris, the reality of our nation was not a modern one, nor industry, democracy, or bourgeoisie, only feudal oligarchies and militarism. We can see Coppola's work as anti-modern, where he photographed things such as the diagonal avenues of the Plaza de Mayo in 1885, as well as in the photo with its bright lights and overwhelming department stores, showing the explosion of capitalism and consumerism, clothing for women, fashion trends. It might create a sense of nostalgia for the pre-Hispanic period. It's also noticeable that Coppola uses a Dutch tilt or the German angle, which is dizzying for the viewer and might represent a feeling of alienation or dissociation in modern Argentina. Therefore, whilst this acknowledges modern Western influences in Buenos Aires, it also suggests the significance of this has been creating a metropolis in which the Argentinians were influenced and had no real ownership of this modernization. On the other hand, Coppola may have wanted this photo to encourage Spanish Americans to engage with this modern culture on their own terms and come to grips with this new world themselves. Whilst modernity may invoke a nostalgic view of pre-Hispania, the growth of entertainment and cultural capital could also be exciting. The buzz surrounding Buenos Aires may have been significantly influenced by Western modernity, but perhaps Coppola felt the people of the city and their own engagement with it were truly what defined it, and that the spirit of the place should not be taken away despite the growing connections to the Western world. Ba
infancia asomada, sueños de cielo que tuvo sin hambre en la escuela.